Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kevin, for that lovely introduction. And it really is my pleasure to join Business North Harbour once again and to speak with you about this year's government budget. Let me acknowledge my colleague, the Honourable Paul Goldsmith, who is the Minister for the Public Service and Digitising Government. So there's a clue of what's to come. Most importantly, let me acknowledge you, the business leaders, employers, entrepreneurs, and Kiwi battlers represented in this room today. I know that you work hard for a living, that you take seriously the people who depend on you for their jobs, and that many of you have been through a hard slog this past few years. First there was COVID, then there was out of control inflation and spiralling interest rates, then there was the inevitable economic downturn and the massive efforts you have taken to leave that behind. And that's before we mention the actions of the current occupant of the White House, or the fuel crisis the world is now facing. Doing what we can as a government to make economic conditions easier for you is front and centre for me every time I put together a budget. Because when you do well, New Zealand does well. Jobs are created, pay rises can be paid, and life can be more affordable for every Kiwi. So thank you sincerely for what you do. As the Prime Minister highlighted last week, this year's budget does take place in challenging times. The world is obviously more volatile than ever, and things we once took for granted as a country, like secure fuel supply or a rules-based trading system, are no longer a given. Across the globe, countries are struggling to deliver the improving living standards and basic affordability that citizens rightly expect. And as a small trading nation, already carrying high levels of debt, New Zealand is heavily exposed to these global trends. We're still carrying a deficit from the COVID spend-up, and international credit rating agencies are watching us closely. The interest bill on our debt has soared to about $9 billion a year. Unemployment has only just started falling, and Kiwis are fairly focused on what it will take to make life more affordable in this country. And I have to say, with an election around the corner, it is very tempting to proffer another spending band-aid in response, to suggest a superficial solution that sounds good today, even if it doesn't deliver tomorrow. You know the genre, the kind of announcement that comes with a catchy slogan, typically about something free or promising a cash handout that we can't really afford. Well, we've seen that movie before, and we didn't like the ending, to quote my friend Taylor Swift. So consider the last government's cost of living payment, a $350 band-aid that ended up being paid out to French backpackers and dead people, and only added more fuel to the underlying inflation fire. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound. The wound was still in need of treatment long after the band-aid had worn off. So tempting as it is, our government is not going to repeat those mistakes. Instead, we are doing the substantive reform work to address the underlying drivers of today's affordability challenges, so that New Zealand can be a more affordable place now and in the years ahead. We're making consumer prices more affordable by keeping underlying inflation in check with clear accountabilities for the Reserve Bank, supported by a sensible spending approach by government. Making the business of government more affordable by driving value for money in all that we do, from service delivery through to infrastructure planning. Making housing more affordable to rent and to buy by fast-tracking new housing developments, pushing forward planning reform, ending the war on landlords, and with interest rates having tracked lower on our watch. Making household rates more affordable by legislating for rates caps, supported by work to simplify and refocus local government. Making electricity more affordable by consenting and incentivising the generation investments needed to ensure abundant, affordable and resilient energy supply. Making childcare more affordable by providing the Family Boost tax rebate to families who are working hard for their kids. Making insurance more affordable by pausing hikes in the natural hazard levy while we get to the bottom of what's really driving insurance costs. Making groceries more affordable by carefully doing the overdue and complex work needed to enhance competition between supermarkets. Making work, investment and savings affordable by stopping Labour's constant march towards more taxes and instead reducing them where we can. And making hard work and entrepreneurialism affordable by continuing the growth reforms needed to make New Zealand a better place to establish and grow a business, whether that's by signing new free trade agreements, go India, lifting education standards or delivering growth-enhancing public infrastructure. Now let's be clear, none of this work delivers overnight. And I'm with every Kiwi who wants it done as fast as possible. But I truly believe that our government's approach of addressing our country's underlying challenges with durable reform is the only honest and responsible response to today's affordability concerns. Put simply, in an uncertain and fast-changing world, New Zealand simply can't afford another failed spend-up. Now, more than ever, you need your government to hold a steady hand on the tiller, ensuring the country's finances are in fit condition to withstand whatever comes our way, that the public services you depend on are delivered well and can be sustained, that we are putting in place the building blocks for a more affordable tomorrow. That's why this year's budget will continue our ongoing work to get the books back in balance and the debt curve bending down. With the global fuel crisis underway, some would have us put those plans on hold. We say no. Those goals are more important now than ever before. So in this year's budget, we've reduced the amount of new money that we're giving ourselves for day-to-day spending, and we've carefully prioritised your precious taxpayer dollars towards the things that really matter. With careful budgeting and ongoing reprioritisation, we have been able to achieve a lot. On Budget Day, we will announce a series of investments needed to make this a stronger, more resilient and more affordable country now and in the years ahead. Let me pick out some of the highlights of what Budget 2026 will deliver. A larger envelope of capital spending to support the building of major new job-rich public infrastructure projects that support economic growth and resilience. A major lift in funding for our health system to support better primary healthcare, along with specialist, elective and emergency services. targeted investments in frontline services, including those delivered by our schools, police and corrections services. A continued enhancement of the capability of the New Zealand Defence Force so that it can once again properly contribute to the defence relationships on which our national security depends. And more progress towards our goals of balanced books and lower debt. You will hear more from me on all of these fronts just under 2 weeks from now. For today, I want to share with you the details of one important initiative in this year's budget. And that is the next phase in our plans to transform the public service. A driving goal for our government is to deliver better public services for New Zealanders. And not just by blithely spending more and more, but by driving better results from the spending we already do. Our perspective as a government is simple. A government's compassion shouldn't be judged by the size of the cheques it writes on your behalf, but rather it should be judged for the results we get for the spending. Ensuring value for taxpayer money should not be a radical position, but the need to restate it is evidenced by recent history. I want you to cast your mind back to 2023, as uncomfortable as that may be for some of you. Labor tripled government debt in dollar terms, lifted spending by 73%, and left behind a structural deficit. What's worse, there was almost nothing to show for this historic spend-up. Educational achievement went backwards. Health waiting lists grew. Immunisation rates fell. Violent crime increased. And social housing waiting lists exploded. Grand visions for light rail across Auckland resulted in little but a canned cycle bridge and a massive consultancy bill. So what did New Zealand have to show for the structural deficit bequeathed to us? In part, we had the wage bill of a truly historic hiring spree, with the number of public servants having exploded from 47,250 on the election of the Labour government to 65,700 by the time they left office. So to put that into context, that growth in public sector roles outpaced job creation in the private sector at a ratio of almost 3 to 1. Worse, most of the growth occurred in the back office, with ballooning costs for policy analysts and consultancy invoices, apologies to the consultants in the room, rather than for frontline positions. The country was on a completely unsustainable course, with the books in tatters and public services in decline. So since being elected, this government has been on a mission to reverse those trends. And our belief is that you don't need to break the bank to get better results. And that belief may be poo-pooed by my opposition colleagues, but I know that the people in this room get it. Your mission for increased productivity isn't a debating point. It's essential for staying in business. You think carefully about every extra dollar you spend in your business, and you seek to constantly squeeze more bang out of every buck. And you relish the opportunity to use new technologies and tools to deliver better for your customers and to get greater returns for the work you put in. My conversations with several of you over lunch about how you're unleashing AI is a great example of that. Well, you should expect the same focus and approach from your government. After all, it is your money that we are spending. And so the good news is we've already made significant progress. When we came to office, the Prime Minister set clear targets for the outcomes we want to achieve from the public service. We are rigorous in measuring our progress against those targets and in prioritising our resources to achieve them. We've had an ongoing focus on stopping poorly targeted spending, and we've put every new idea to the affordability test. A tougher stance on law and order, accompanied by more visible policing, has driven a considerable decline in violent crime. Our targets have been met well ahead of schedule, with 49,000 fewer victims of violent crime since we were elected. That's 49,000 lives that have been made immeasurably better than would have been the case. And a 25% reduction in the number of children and young people with serious and persistent violent behaviour. Hospital wait times have stabilised and are now improving. People are waiting for less time in the emergency department and for elective surgery. Last year, our elective boost policy saw us partner with the private sector to deliver an additional 16,000 life-changing medical procedures. In education, we're driving reforms to bring back a structured approach to teaching reading, writing and maths. The early results are exciting. Attendance levels are up. Maths students are making faster progress and new entrants are reaching literacy benchmarks in far greater numbers. Through modern delivery, we've significantly reduced the cost of building new classrooms. Another example is housing. The last government left us with a heavily indebted state housing agency, Kāinga Ora. Record waiting lists for social housing, soaring rents in the private sector, and thousands of children living in emergency motel rooms. Well, we've turned all of that around. Kāinga Ora's debt is now down $9.5 billion, even while the number of social houses has increased by more than 7,000, even while waiting lists have reduced by more than 5,000 people, while rents have stabilised and 2,000 children have been moved out of motels and into safe, warm homes. Now, all of these performance improvements have come at the same time as a period of cost restraint and fiscal consolidation as we chart that path back to balanced books and debt reduction. Our first two budgets included $43 billion worth of redirected spending. We've driven hard to reduce back office costs, with spending on consultants down $915 million, clerical and administrative positions in government down 15%, managers down 6%, policy analysts down 10%. What this shows you is that even with more limited resources, our public service here in New Zealand can achieve a lot. And I can tell you honestly that some of New Zealand's best, brightest and most publicly spirited individuals are employed in our government agencies. With good leadership at the top, they are capable of extraordinary things. But if you've been listening to this record of progress and quietly thinking, there's still so much to do, then let me say, we agree. Yes, progress to date has been promising. We've fixed up the basics, but so much more is needed to achieve the modern, efficient and productive public services that Kiwis expect. Our government is as frustrated as you probably are by the fragmentation and silos, the complexity, the status quo thinking, and the dangerously slow take-up of digital and AI technologies. In truth, in too many parts, the back office of government still looks like an 80s relic, run on old-fashioned systems with slow bureaucratic processes that are too often about box ticking rather than improving outcomes for you. We are reaching the limits of the current public service operating model. The current system is failing to meet the expectations Kiwis have in 2026, let alone what you'll expect in 2036 and beyond. So today, I'm announcing that as part of this year's budget, our government is embarking on a fundamental overhaul of the public service. This is to drive better services for you, to drive more productivity, and get better value for taxpayer resources. We've set 3 key goals, which I'll take you through, and set a sinking lid on agencies' operating budgets in order to guarantee progress. Goal number 1. We are going to streamline the number of government agencies and entities. Comparisons are not exact, but New Zealand has, by latest count, 39 departments and ministries administering budget lines. That compares with 16 in Australia, 24 in the UK, and around 12 in Finland. Of course, more departments equals more managers, more HR departments, more comms teams, and more administrators. More departments also equals more statutory compliance requirements, more silos, more interdepartmental consultation, and more costs for the citizens and businesses forced to multiply your interactions with government. So, over the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to significantly reduce the number of public service agencies. Following today's announcement, public service agencies will be asked to come up with proposals to logically merge their existing activities around citizen-facing functions using common technology platforms. We expect to announce more detail on those proposals in the coming months. The creation of the new Ministry of Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport is an example of what's possible. Merging the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry for the Environment will reduce duplication and ensure a faster, more integrated approach to issues like housing affordability and climate adaptation. It will also create significant savings along the way and is an example of the approach we want to take. Goal number 2. We're going to ensure that government is fully on board the digitisation and AI revolutions sweeping the world. While New Zealanders are increasingly conducting more of their business digitally, the public sector has not been keeping pace. For too long, the public service, frankly, has been scared of AI, slow to move to the cloud, and has procured a complex and fragmented set of overlapping IT solutions. We need to digitise both customer-facing services and back-office systems to make it easier and more affordable for people to interact with government agencies. We have a Government Chief Digital Officer with responsibility for overseeing digital investments. His mission? To improve services and drive down cost. The Chief Digital Officer is overseeing investment in new digital systems to move human resources, payroll, case management and other systems to the cloud, and to embed AI deployment as a basic expectation for all public entities. An example of what's possible is the recent trial of an AI scribe tool in hospital emergency rooms, which has reduced the amount of time clinicians, nurses and doctors have to spend on generating file notes and increased the time they spend with patients, which is what they all want to be doing. So it's no surprise that feedback from doctors and nurses has been overwhelmingly positive. Goal number 3. We're going to get public servant numbers back in step with historic norms with a focus on hiring and retaining talent. Now, every business leader here today knows it's not how many people you employ, it's the talents of those people that counts. So we as a government are going to bring renewed focus to the essential task of attracting, retaining and developing public service talent. The Public Service Commission is already working to identify and develop future public service leaders, is actively tracking our 100 highest potential leaders, and will soon launch a Public Service Academy to professionalise its talent development efforts. At the same time, we're going to pull the brakes on the increase in overall public servant numbers. Historically, New Zealand's core public service has equated to about 1% of the population for 22 of the past 33 years. After a period of largesse under the last government, it now hovers at around 1.2%. One of Labour's first moves was to remove the cap that National had previously put on the number of people employed in government administration. Unsurprisingly, that spurred a huge hiring spree, with the number of workers in service support roles rocketing up by around 46%. That is unsustainable, it is unaffordable, and it is out of step with international trends. Look around the world. In Canada, Mark Carney's government is reducing the size of the federal public service workforce by 10% over the next few years. In Singapore, growth in the public service is pegged to not exceed overall growth in the labour force. In the UK, they are systematically shrinking administrative budgets. Our government has therefore set a goal to get our core public servant numbers back to the historic norm at 1% of the population, roughly equivalent to what it was before Labour took office. We will be tracking progress towards a numerical target of no more than 55,000 full-time equivalent public service employees by July 2029. That's 8,700 fewer than were employed in December last year. Now let me stress that these targets apply to the core public service and do not include teachers, nurses, doctors, police, or people employed by Crown entities. We fully expect that with good budgeting, we will be hiring more nurses, police officers, and others in critical frontline roles. So how will we achieve the reduction in numbers? By doing the things your business considers routine, allowing for natural attrition, stopping duplication, streamlining back office functions, accelerating uptake of digital tech, and requiring government agencies to report every quarter on their progress towards the targets. And what will the result be? A modern, high-performing public service that is more connected, productive and efficient, and that ensures more resources are directed towards better outcomes for New Zealanders. We'll also deliver some big savings. To reflect and drive the efficiencies expected from these reforms, this year's budget reduces most agencies' operating budgets by 2% in the coming year, followed by a further 5% in each of the following 2 years. Those savings will add up and have created significant headroom for higher priority investments in this year's budget, a total of $2.4 billion over the forecast period, averaging around $597 million a year. These savings will now be deployed to better purposes, to delivering more services in our health system, to increasing educational resources for our schools, to building infrastructure and strengthening our defence force and police. And I look forward to detailing those investments on Budget Day. Now I acknowledge, some like to pretend that we can have all of that investment without saving a dollar elsewhere. Well, they're wrong. Their promises do not add up, and the future that they invite is bleak. It is a future of increasing taxes, heavier borrowing, shaky finances, and unaffordable debt. Sensible political leaders owe it to Kiwis to face seriously into the increasing volatility of a changing world. We simply must ensure our own house is in order and that our government books are under control. We must do the work now to ensure we can face the future with confidence. In closing, let me say once again, thank you for listening and for your continued work to realise the great potential of this country. Despite New Zealand's many challenges, there is really no place that I would rather help lead than this country. Look around the world and reflect on the blessings we have. We are a country free from armed conflict with undisputed borders, access to abundant natural resources, a proud history of tenacity and innovation, strong community spirit, smart people, savvy business leaders, and, may the voters agree in November, a country that had the wisdom to elect a government with the drive and common sense to secure a better and more affordable future for us all. So Budget 2026 will help secure New Zealand's future, your future and your children's future. Thank you.
Any questions from the floor? Oh. Straight away.
Yes, sir.
Inspiring speech. I couldn't help but think about the same promises made at the Super City. I'm just wondering how you're going to be able to achieve these things correctly.
Well, as a Wellingtonian, I can tell you that we look at the rates increases in the Super City and wish for those. Actually, to be fair on Auckland, it has done a better job of keeping rates increases under control than many councils around the country. So I do want to acknowledge that. I think you're right to say it's not enough to simply say, let's do amalgamations. That's why we've used a double-pronged approach. On the one hand, saying we want you to make this more logical, to reduce the duplication, to bring it together efficiently. But on the other hand, also saying, and a key bottom line is you have to reduce the cost. And that's why this year's budget, we've put that sinking lid on administrative budgets to ensure that as these proposals come together, they're delivering what it says on the tin, genuinely reducing costs. So thank you for your question. And no, the Super City isn't perfect, but I'm sure the council will keep perfecting it. Yes, sir. Thank you for that question, because you are singing from my song sheet, which is that ultimately the growth in this country won't come from politicians sitting around a cabinet table working out how to tax you more and divide it better. Instead, where it will come from is the entrepreneurialism, the good ideas, the risk-taking by our private sector, by individuals and firms who decide to do something new, to export to a new market, to invest in expansion. So that's what the government's Going for Growth policy agenda is all about. There's 5 key areas we are constantly reforming. The first is developing talent, education and skills. Because if we want the businesses in 20 to 30 years to prosper, they need skilled workers that are trained here in New Zealand. Second, we need to constantly be looking at how we reduce the red tape and regulation that can prevent innovation. And the classic case of that is overhauling the Resource Management Act. We're going to totally reform that planning system. The third area is we have to constantly drive to keep New Zealand globally connected by welcoming overseas investment and overseas trade. And you've seen some recent successes on that front with the signing of the free trade agreement with India, which opens up a massive new market for businesses. The fourth area that we're very focused on is making a lot more of the government's considerable investment in science, technology and innovation. Because we already put a lot of public research dollars into that work, but historically we haven't connected it enough with the commercial opportunities that await us in 30 years. So we've completely refocused the state-funded science system on that set of goals. And finally, an area that's very close to my heart is we have to be planning and building now the public infrastructure that supports future growth. Whether that's the transport connections needed for modern cities, whether that's an energy system that responds to increasing demand for electricity, or whether that's, frankly, ensuring we have the modern hospitals and schools that citizens depend on. So we are constantly going for growth, and we get it. Ultimately, it's about making the conditions easier for enterprise to flourish.
Any other questions, please?
We only have 3 men. Always disappointing.
Oh, one at the back.
Well, I'm not the one proposing to nationalise the BNZ. And actually, you know, I wasn't the one standing next to Jacinda Ardern when a previous Labour New Zealand First government banned the exploration for oil and gas. And actually that was a very fateful decision, because what that did was it cut off international interest in developing our sovereign energy supplies. And it's been very challenging subsequently to attract overseas investors to explore for the actually, by many measures, abundant gas and oil that we potentially have in New Zealand sovereign territory. So our government is doing a couple of things. The first is Shane Jones, together with our Energy Minister, has set up a fund to partner with the private sector to encourage future gas exploration, noting that if we can have resilient natural gas supplies that are sovereign to New Zealand, that's a whole lot better than relying on coal imported from Indonesia, which is the status quo. The second thing that we're doing is acknowledging that if we are to achieve the abundant, renewable, affordable energy we all want, that electricity we want generated by hydro and wind and solar, we still need backup for the days when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and the lakes are running low. And that's why you saw us come out and say, well, actually, we're going to increase the government's investment in Genesis Energy to ensure that they can put more firming backup capacity in place. And it's also why you're seeing us look at a LNG procurement facility, because here's the thing. We could run short of electricity very soon if we don't cover that gap that is predicted to occur in a dry year in New Zealand when the hydro lakes are running low. That's not a forever problem. In the medium term, we need to attract more investment into renewable generation, but in the short term, we need some cover, and that's what our proposals are about. So thank you for your question. I agree, energy independence and resilience has to be our future. Thank you.
I thought we'd have a go. I don't really know where this is going to sit, but I'm hoping that you could put forward perhaps anything that you can release that's going to support small businesses, as we are a community of them, in this AI sort of next, generation that we're seeing. What support is there from the government in the budget for us?
Yeah, well, look, thank you for your question, and I'm going to hold my discipline and not announce all of the budget today, but I do want to acknowledge the exact point you're making, which is when you look at New Zealand and you say, what does AI mean for our businesses? Well, it's not likely that we're going to create a firm next year that competes with the Magnificent Seven. But what is absolutely the case is we're a country of small businesses, and our small businesses have so much to gain from deploying AI in a way that makes sense for them. I was talking with TJ earlier, who talked about his HR business, which supports many small businesses. And he told me that AI has been a godsend because now the boring manual tasks can be done by the AI bot, and he focuses on the magic and the bit that adds value for his customer. And I want more of our small businesses to be able to do that, so that instead of sitting at the dining room table at night with the lamp on doing your accounts and your invoicing, actually an AI bot's doing that, and you're thinking about growth and innovation and the future. So the Ministry for Business has trialled a range of approaches to supporting small businesses to be educated in AI, to take up AI products, and it's something that I'm very keen on because I want it to be easy for you. So watch this space.
Any more? I've got one that's been submitted already. Okay. May I just? Of course. Thank you. So this is from Arthur Liu, who asks, New Zealand is encouraging deeper economic ties and investment with India under the FTA framework. However, many international companies, including Apple, Vodafone and General Motors, have faced challenges turning Indian investment into sustainable long-term returns due to regulatory complexity, market protection and operational risk. As a small capital country, how will New Zealand ensure that Kiwi businesses investing into India can achieve reliable long-term returns rather than simply carrying disproportionate risk?
Look, I think that's a very astute observation. Any firm wanting to enter a new market is always going to be conscious of what's the regulatory environment like, what's the government policy settings like, and those will remain the sovereign decisions of the Indian government. But what is the case for New Zealand is that we already have many businesses operating in India whose expansion is only held back by the quota limits and tariffs that they face. I'm talking about our kiwi fruit exporters, our wine exporters, our apple exporters, who in the new free trade agreement have massively opened up access to a market of consumers that they're already targeting and that they know are hungry for their product. As we look to the future, I'm also confident that with India's growth, New Zealand will have growth too. You know, I think back to when we signed the free trade agreement with China. And at that point, sir or ma'am, whoever you are, those concerns that you've shared today were very front of mind for many businesses and investors saying, what's it going to be like entering that China market? What's it really going to be like? How's it going to operate? And sure enough, trailblazers went over, there were successes, there were failures. But over time, our trade with China has exploded to the benefit of New Zealand, creating jobs here at home, lifting incomes, creating export opportunities. And so that's the mindset we take to the India Free Trade Agreement. Yes, just like any business entering any market, they'll need to carefully assess whether it makes sense for them. But when doors are open, people can walk through them.
Thank you. I think that's it.
Well, look, thank you very much for your audience today. I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you do as small and medium-sized businesses, a really diverse group of people, and I enjoyed speaking with many of you before lunch. I now have another duty, which is to serve the New Zealand media, and so I'm going to exit and do a quick press conference with Paul Goldsmith, and hopefully I'll have a few minutes to return and say goodbye to a few of you after that. Thanks again, and thank you, Kevin, and your association for hosting me today.